Well, welcome to Huntsville. Glad you all came. It's my hometown here now. Originally from up in Ohio and born in Indiana, and then moved to the DC area. And when I was in the DC area, I got started with Army Materiel Command, and I've been with them for 25 years. So, hooah, the soldiers out there. I came down with them from the DC area, and but all along that way, I've been involved in UFO research since I was age 13. So, and I wish I were, but my birthday's coming up. I'll be 68. So anyway, just a kid, huh? So a little bit about me. I'm going to talk to you about the UFO enigma. I call it the UFO enigma because it's just a strange kind of thing. And the other interesting thing I'll point out here is that just in the short time that I've had a chance to meet with you, I think I've probably had about 10 reports. You've all passed me your sighting cases and stuff like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I got started in this in Dayton, Ohio. That was the home of Project Blue Book, by the way. That's the Air Force organization that studied UFOs. Little did I know that that was going on when I was 13 years old, and I had to go to an 8th grade science class and do a book report, or basically a presentation, a 10-minute presentation on a topic that was on a list. And I was late for class, and the only thing that nobody signed up for was the thing UFOs. So I put my name next to it and said, okay, I didn't even know what it was. I went up after class, and I said to my 8th grade science teacher, I said, what's a UFO? He said, it's an unidentified flying object. I said, well, what are those, you know? And he said, you ever heard of flying saucers? I said, yeah, but I don't still, what does that mean? Okay, you want me to talk about flying saucers? I watched that on science fiction. So anyway, little did I know that, I did this horrible job of actually going and actually studying it. And when I came back on the day to deliver my presentation, little did I know that my teacher was well read on the subject and was going to pummel me with all kinds of questions which I couldn't answer. And I got the D on that report that day. And I went home that evening, and Walter Cronkite came on the evening news and was talking about a case in Socorro, New Mexico, April 24th, 1964. And that was a case where a police officer by the name of Lonnie Zamora was in pursuit of a speeding vehicle, and he hears an explosion off to his right. And he stops the pursuit because he's thinking that maybe some kids might have been over there in this dynamite shack that was over there. And when he gets over there, he's up on like a rise. He's looking down and he's seeing an object that's oval, or an egg-shaped object that was sitting out there with like tripod legs, if you would, and two small little beings that were right next to it that were scurrying about. And then he gets up as close as he can. He gets out of his vehicle, and then suddenly the beings are gone, and now the craft is shooting up. It stops up in the midair, and then it shoots off away from his position. In the meantime, he had called for backup, and the backup had gone out there and also saw the object as it was departing. And it was also witnessed by other people in the town. Well, I'm hearing this on the evening news after I got my D, and I'm thinking like, wow. That was pretty incredible. I didn't even know that that stuff was going on, right? So a couple days later, my aunt came over, picked me up, and took me to a bookstore in downtown Dayton, Ohio. And I go in and I walked up and said, hey, do you have any serious books on UFOs? And they took me over to this one section. And sure enough, there was a book called The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Captain Edward Ruppelt, the former head of Project Blue Book. And he was talking about the UFO subject, and I'm reading this thing, and I'm thinking like, and he's talking about jets that were chasing and firing at these things. And I'm going like, what? You know, I mean, I didn't read that in the book that I saw, which was, the books I picked up for my book report were My Trip to Venus and My Saturnian Lover. And it just didn't work out very well, you know, and that's why I got the D, of course, you know. But ultimately, it's a situation where I said that there was, and I also made the naive statement at that young age to say that surely if there was something to it, the Air Force would tell us about it. Right, yeah. So anyway, well then I'm reading the book and I'm finding out that Project Blue Book is just up the street from me in Dayton, Ohio. And I'm going like, wait a minute, wow, this is incredible. So that just got my interest going, and the next thing I know, I was a voracious reader. I was collecting everything I could get on it. I was reading clipping out news clipping. I was getting books left and right. I was reading them, beginning, front to back. And I started talking around the city of Dayton, Ohio, and giving lectures. I got an astronomy club that wanted me to come. Then I got some sort of Sertoma club. Then I was in an Optimus club. Then I was at a church. I was at this, and I was constantly running around at age 13 to 14, going and delivering presentations. So I've been talking since I was that little in front of groups, right? And the next thing I know, I was on Phil Donahue. So Phil was in the city of Dayton, and so now I'm on Phil Donahue. And the next thing I know is that the whole city of Dayton was considering me the UFO guy, right? It's like, you got a problem? Call Rich. And then I was getting like late night phone calls like, can you check out the ghost? Can you check out the Bigfoot? Can you check out the, well, wait a minute, I can't keep up with all this. So I was now going around and I said, I can't do all that. I got to focus on the UFO because that's where my interest is. And then I would be going out and doing a UFO case investigation, and I would have showing up a man who was wearing an Air Force uniform, and he would come over here and introduce, and he would be investigating the case because he was with the Air Force Project Blue Book, right? So he was doing that case investigation. I would sit next to him, and we started comparing notes, right? And the next thing I know, I was getting connected very well with Right Pat and Project Blue Book. So now I'm working with and getting to know the people at Blue Book. I'm getting to know the people at Foreign Technology Division up there. I got to know a lot of the different people at the base, and they would be at my lectures, or they would be, The next thing I had, they gave me a telephone number that I could call up to get radar approach control and actually talk to the radar and say, hey, by the way, I've got a sighting down here. Do you have anything on, are you picking up anything on radar, right? So I was now connected to radar approach control. My name was also in every police department around the area, right? So a report would come in, I get a police call, and then they come over to my house, pick me up, I'm in the back of the cruiser, the lights are flashing, and they're taking me out to the case. So I had personal escort service, by the police departments. I'm going like, whoa. So I'm literally watched this whole thing explode to the point where I'm a young kid running around doing all this UFO stuff and looking at cases and seeing the planet Venus at different parts of the city because everybody was pointing and saying, oh, look at that UFO. It's the planet Venus. Oh. And then the rest of the night I was looking at the planet Venus from different parts of the city. So anyway, the next thing I know, I was saying, well, are there any organizations that are doing this? And I got connected with various organizations. I started with a mutual UFO network, which was called the Midwest UFO Network back around the 1969 period. And I've been with them for a long, long time. And I was one of their leaders and the deputy director of investigations and the STAR team manager and various other things. And I've investigated over 1,000 cases over my time period. I've actually gone out into the cases, climbed across the fields, gone out there and looked at landing sites, and I've looked at about everything you can possibly imagine. You'll get to see some of that stuff here tonight when I'm going to show you. But I also had these ties to the Air Force Base, so I would get people that would walk up to me and said my job was to go chase and film UFOs. And then I would land. They would take off the gun camera off the aircraft, and then I had to go sign a document saying that I wouldn't talk about it. But then he's talking to me. And then I had the chief of Aeromed Research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base coming up and telling me about the fact that he's going out and investigating crash cases where there are beings out there with no backbones. And I'm going like, wow. And so what I'm going to try and tell you is that over the course of the 55 years, just like the stories that I've heard here tonight from you all telling me and walking me up, that this happens routinely, and it's going on more than we all want to know. A lot of people do not report their cases. Most of the people don't report their cases. Most of the people don't even talk about it. I had one couple that didn't talk about it for 48 years who told me their story. And I'm going like, they didn't even tell their kids. So I guess what I'm trying to get to you is that the sightings we hear about are nothing. And in fact, Let me tell you something. The vast majority of people who reported the sightings to Blue Book and various other things were hesitant, but they would call in and they would say that I saw a UFO and they have a light that they saw, and that felt safe. But if I said to you that I saw a light and the light came down and it knocked the power out of my car car went dead, and I saw a little guy get out of it and do something like that and then hop back in it, that's pretty strange, right? So the stranger the story is, the less likely people will tell it. Okay? So the ones that you could readily explain that Blue Book got were the ones that people felt safe about, that could have been a light, could have been this, it could have been that, because that's a safe story to tell. Okay? And even then, they could not explain over 30% of the cases that they had. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is it's a lot more prolific than we get. On average, like MUFON was getting on the scale of about 700 sightings a month being reported. Take that up by about a factor of about 20. And that's what's going on each day. Around the globe. It's a global phenomenon. Right now, there are over 20 countries that have UFO investigations as part of their government. Did you know that? You didn't know that, right? Anyway, a lot of stuff here. I work as an IT consultant over here at the base. I'm actually been with the Army here for 25 years. They have a funny thing. They call me the command ufologist. I thought, wow, that's pretty wild. In fact, you got people in the hall, he's the command ufologist. You know, I'm going like, yeah. But anyway, my whole cube is decked out in UFO stuff, and people come up and are always telling me their stories. And it's just absolutely fascinating, the stuff you hear that they're not willing to talk about to anybody else. Anyway, I'm the founder of an organization called the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. And let me tell you about UAP, and I'll give you a little bit of an understanding why we're not saying UFO, but we call that unidentified aerospace phenomena. And the reason why we're calling it aerospace is because that these things exist underwater, in the air, and out in space. Okay? And also let me tell you very clearly right up front, the government is now starting to come out and say it, UFOs exist. And it's been a long time waiting to hear that. But we're starting to now hear that, and I am extremely thrilled right now. So I'm a part of SCU. We're composed of right now, I think we're up to like about 70 scientists that are, and researchers and analysts that have an interest in this subject. And in fact, in March, we had our conference right in this very room. And I had the former head of the newly disclosed UFO program at the Pentagon here talking. And we got people now, scientists are heavily engaging with us now. And you'll see why, because there's some pretty incredible stuff that we're analyzing. We've got 2 papers that we've put together here recently. They're pretty thick. One's a 160-page paper, and the other one's a 270-page paper.
Don't give it to George.
I won't give it to George. This one's on a case that I'll be talking about, the Aguadilla case, and this one's on the USS Nimitz case. And we've now looked at the physics of the entire thing, that whole encounter, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. We have about 20 PhDs that are on board, and they're all across the board in terms of the fields that they're in. And they're thrilled to death that we're doing this now. So anyway, I'm tickled. We're a charity organization. We're relatively new. We're just getting started, but we're very excited. We've got a large presence out there on websites, Facebook, YouTube, and everything else. And we're getting a lot of really, really good information. Okay, well, what is it? Why do I call it a UAP versus a UFO? And again, I mentioned a little bit about the fact that these objects, they've been called a lot of different things over the course of history. If you look back during World War II, they were called the Foo Fighters. You might have heard that term. They were flying around Allied aircraft and even the other side's aircraft, and nobody knew what they were and why they were doing that. Then you have underwater submerged objects that are reported. I don't know if you know it, but there's Navy training exercises that were underwater with subs that actually tracked objects going at 375 knots underwater. Okay, tracked them. And then you have other aircraft, other situations where they actually trapped them up in Sweden in a fjord. And what happened was the object came out from that fjord and knocked all 30 of the ships and everything else, the power out for a half an hour, while it then jumped out of the fjord and it was gone. Okay, so you don't often hear about this stuff. And what I'm trying to tell you is that we're so caught up in the news media and all this other stuff that we fail to really spend any time studying the phenomena. And it's only when you study it or you really get into the cases and you really want to dig deep that we all learn how just extensive this phenomena is and how legitimate it is. I've got stacks of documents that would probably go about that tall that are Freedom of Information Act documents. And if you read those things, you'd find out that every part of this government has been extremely concerned about the whole phenomenon. All right? Feel free to read them. I mean, and you can see it yourself. Concern, concern, concern. And at different points of the time, they had major people that were coming out and saying, leaders who were saying, we don't know what these things are. They're here. We can't figure out what they are. So the military and the government has been as perplexed about this as anybody else. And now you're starting to hear about the fact that these things are hanging around Navy exercises. And the physics on what they're doing is beyond anything we've got. Okay? All right. The term got started by that Ruppelt guy that I was talking about in the book. He called it an unidentified flying object, but we go with the aerospace thing because it covers those three different dimensions. In fact, I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, but the same kind of object, the same kind of shape is able to go into space and go into our atmosphere and at the same time go in the water. And you know as well as I do, you can't take a submarine and put it up in the air. And we build for that aerospace dynamic. That's how we build craft, right? Well, they're flying around things that are just disc shape, and they can go in the water, they can come up in the air, and they can go into space. Same shape. All right. So what have we done over the years to study the UAP phenomena? Well, we've had various Air Force projects. We had Project Sign. That was in 1947 to 1948 time period. We had Project Twinkle that was looking into a thing called fireballs that were out in New Mexico. We have Project Moondust, which was a retrieval organization out of Fort Belvoir, in which they would take off and on a moment's notice to go over and find any kind of crashed wreckage, and then it would be brought back, and then they would analyze it. One of the things that we do in the military is we re-engineer stuff that we get from other countries or anywhere else. In fact, just down the road here is the Missile and Space Intelligence Center that does that. Whenever we get Scuds or we get any kind of missiles, they take it, they have engineers that's smart, and they tear it apart and they put it back together. They figure out how it works. Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patt did the same kind of thing. You know, that's what they do. We have scientists. The military's always been doing that. The Greeks did it, you know. Trojans, you know, or not, the Greeks in the Greek fire, whenever they take over another country, they get the technology, they bring it back, they use it. So it's no surprise. You have Project Grudge, which was 1948 to 49. Then Blue Book finally came in 1951 and then lasted until 1969. I got started in 64, so I had 5 years of Blue Book existence and was able to have that connection with the base. Then you had their attempt to get out of it. They used the Condon report, which was done by the University of Colorado to produce a big, thick report that, by the way, nobody would read, to give to the public and say, here, read it. And then when you take a look at it, You find out that it's a lot of information here, and there's some really excellent cases. And by the way, that they couldn't explain 30% of the cases they looked at. And yet they had the audacity on the front end, because Condon was helping to close the Project Blue Book, where he writes an executive summary. He says, "We hereby show that there's nothing to it." So, yeah. Well, anyway, that was a snow job on the U.S. citizenry to say that there's nothing to it, and we now can close it out. And then they got the stamp of approval from the Association of Advanced Scientists, who said that, yeah, okay, well, we support that conclusion. Now we kill the project, and everything will die. All the public interest will die. Guess what? UFOs went haywire. And you ready for this? Right after they closed the project, they were starting to have all these massive encounters at all of our nuclear sites. All of the objects were showing up at our nuke sites. And they were knocking out our missiles in the silos. And they left, and they didn't do it just here. They went over to Bentwaters in England, and they went over to the Russians, and they were doing that around the world. I'll tell you about that too. Anyway, so the question was, did they really close the project? And what we're finding out was that actually there's been an ongoing project for some time, and we didn't know about it, and I'll tell you about that one. There's been a lot of studies and hearings. You had the CIA in 1953 that held the Robertson panel, and they basically helped the Air Force to say, you need to get out of this. You need to quiet. You need to have Arthur Godfrey come in and educate people that there's nothing to this phenomena. And you need to debunk the cases. You need to get it toned down, because people were getting very excited. We don't want the American public to get excited about something that's really strange in the sky. Okay, yeah, no problem. Then you had, Gerald Ford had a hearing, or that was proposed hearing, that was never held in '66 as a result of the swamp gas thing. Remember the swamp gas thing in Michigan? You ever heard about that, right? Okay, and I talked with Dr. Hynek and stuff like that, and he was telling me the whole story about the fact that, he was just saying, well, it could be this, it could be a swamp gas, and all the news media jumped up, ran out of the room, and Air Force calls it swamp gas, and so. Anyway, he regretted having said that even then. Project Identification was held in Piedmont, Missouri. That was a scientist that was studying a phenomena, which, by the way, I'm studying as well. But in 1973, in Piedmont, Missouri, they had these lights, balls of light that were moving around the skies, that were moving around, and they didn't know what they were. In fact, what you do is you find out that they're all around the globe. They got them in Australia. They got them in Marfa, Texas has lights. The Brown Mountain lights you might have heard of. They've got them up. We've got them over here in Cloverdale. I'm investigating those over here. And they've been since 1973. Witnesses around the farms are actually watching as the object or the light comes up and goes next to their cattle, and then eventually goes up into an altitude. And it gets up to about maybe 2,000 feet, and it heads. And strangely enough, these lights are all going in an east-west fashion. They either go east or they go west, but they don't go north and south. They last about, maybe like something on the scale of about 20 minutes, and then they're gone. And what are these things? Why are they doing what they're doing? Well, we're using spectral cameras, and we're finding out what the composition of the lights are. We're finding out that sulfur is a common element in it. We're also finding out that scandium, yttrium, and some other things that are rare earth metals are a part of that makeup. And for some reason, these things exist, and they do some incredible things. Like in Piedmont, you had an object that went and shot up at several thousands of miles an hour, just straight up. And and the other interesting thing is, like a light bulb, I can walk around the light bulb and see it from all sides, right? With these lights, you might see it on one side, but you go on the other side, you don't see it. And we've had planes that fly across, and they're looking down and said, I don't see the light. Everybody else is seeing it, right? So they're in Hestel in Norway, and we're as scientists, we're comparing notes with all the other scientists who are also studying it, because we're trying to figure out what it is. And it's a phenomenon. It's naturally in the air, and they're called Earth lights. And a lot of people just don't know about them, and scientists don't even know about them. We don't know a lot of stuff about what's up in the air, and we're finding it out. We didn't know about sprites in the top of clouds for a long time. You know, we only learned that in the last maybe 10 years or something like that, that there are these unusual flashes of light. So I guess what I'm trying to say, science is always like a little lagging behind. We're trying to get caught up. There's been a whole bunch of other things like, you know, UN hearings. The Project Condign was out there, the Sturrock panel, and the Cometa report that the French did. Most other countries like France and everything else take it way more serious than we do. They've got, I mean, literally, their gendarmes will actually report sightings and everything else themselves. You can go to a gendarme and say, I saw them. He won't be laughing at you. He'll be taking a serious report, and they'll be reported up. So, and let me also clarify that what else happened in the 70s with the subject of UFOs? Remember I told you the CIA was trying to squelch it? Right? The subject, play it down. Right? Remember those weekly tabloids you'd see in the checkout stands? It would show like the, you know, pictures of something, and then they'd have an alien. You'd have Hillary's holding a baby, an alien baby, or something like that, right? Did you know that that person who was responsible for that magazine and publications was CIA backed? Okay, so what are we doing? We're trying to make the subject completely laughable. Keep it joking. We don't want to discuss this stuff. Okay? That's what it was about. And it was very effective because it helped to keep the public from going out and having these conversations like you had at the table and with me tonight, where I feel uncomfortable about talking about a sighting. Until December 16th, 2017, where now we suddenly have a change. The Pentagon is announcing a secret UFO program that they have that was put together by 3 senators. Harry Reid, Daniel Inouye, and Republican Ted Stevens all got together because they wanted to know about this subject. And they said, we want a project out of DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, to look at this. Originally, they were trying to make it a special access program, which means it would be in the, if you would, they call it the black world, but they didn't get that kind of funding. But anyway, bottom line was they called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Nothing about UFOs in there, right? A way to play it down, because there's a lot of, even at the Pentagon, a lot of people that question this subject, you know. And you have also people that group was being attacked by even people in the religious world. Oh, these are demonic. We don't want to get into that. Okay? So there's all that conflict you run into when talking about subjects like this that were coming out even at the Pentagon when they were doing the study. But anyway, Mr. Lou Elizondo, the guy that was here in March, talked about the program called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And they were starting to collect all of the military reports and videos and radar data and everything else that they could possibly get on the subject. And they began investigating it. And they also teamed with Robert Bigelow from Bigelow Aerospace to do that. But Lou ran the program from 2008 until 2017 when he left. And he decided to go in with an organization called To the Stars Academy to basically be able to talk about it. Because when he was trying to go up through the chain to get to General Mattis, he was running into all the middle people who wanted to be able to keep the story down and quiet. So he couldn't, and they wanted to keep them from telling him. Because ultimately what you have are these encounters are happening during our military exercises, which we, by the way, we tell people to stay away when we're doing these things. We're running missions and tests and everything else, and it's not like we have live fire, everything else. But bottom line is that we're out there doing these exercises, and we'll send out what they call a NOTAM, which says, get out of the area, right? Stay out of our area. We're doing this exercise. And yet these objects are showing up in the area, right? And these objects have no kind of propulsion system that's observable. It's not like they have jet engines. They don't have helicopters. They don't have wings or anything like that. They don't have any of that. In fact, they called it a tic-tac because it looked just like a tic-tac. And let me tell you, we did the calculation, but it was reported to be on the Aegis radar system to go from 80,000 feet. Now imagine this, 80,000 feet to stop at sea level in 0.78 of a second. That's not even 1 second, okay? Now think about that, 80,000 feet. Okay, you're talking about a descent that would break apart any kind of aircraft that we've got. It would have disintegrated. If there was something inside of it, it would have been a puddle when it stopped. It had no indications of heating in the atmosphere. How does it not heat the atmosphere? No sonic booms. But guess what? That's what objects have been doing since the very beginning. Did you know that? That thing I just talked about has exactly the same thing if I go back to a 1950 case in Papua New Guinea, or if I go to a case in Russia, or if I go anywhere else. These objects are maneuvering with that kind of capability. No sonic booms, silent, no indications of heat. No, if I could stand behind one, I don't have any repulsion, like nothing's knocking me back. Go stand in the back of a jet aircraft, right? Or, it's going to throw you back, right? That's how we do it. They're not doing that. They go into the water, they come out of the water, they go into space, they come out of space, and we've got these things on record doing that. So anyway, make a long story short, nothing new for me. Maybe for you guys, but it's not for me. And so anyway, and now you have Christopher Mellon, by the way. You've heard of Mellon, right? The Mellon family, right? The former Deputy of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, who's actually now trying to tell you we have a threat here, and we need to be able to do something with it. And they're finally admitting the fact that that's the case, right? So we know that they exist. Where do they come from? Has always been the question. We don't know. The Tic Tac case was on November 10th to the 14th. During the course of the week, there were a whole bunch of sightings of over 100 of these Tic Tacs. This is off the coast of San Diego. And if you know anything about a carrier group, you know that there's a lot of ships and a lot of technology and a lot of aircraft. So they're about ready to do an exercise, and the Aegis system had been picking up these objects, doing these things from these deep space things and stopping down in the water and everything else for that whole period of time. And by the way, I want to tell you that we measured the Gs. It was over 200 Gs for that force. And it was over like 104,000 miles an hour when it dropped from 80,000 to that time. Okay, so I mean, you're talking a lot. And oh, by the way, the power, we looked at the kinetic energy released that would have been released from that was equivalent to the dam, Hoover Dam. So, and yet it didn't knock out the ships in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to point out that, and oh, by the way, it was seen at going at, there was an object there, it was seen going at 500 knots underwater. That's, that's unheard of, right? So let me show you this. This is one of the clips of a video that was taken with a thermal camera, and it was released. So check this out, if you would, and I'll give you a little bit of an indicator. So there's a jet that's been scrambled. Actually, there were several jets that were scrambled, and one of them happened to capture on his infrared at-FLIR camera this object, and he got a clip, and we'll see here in a minute. It's a Super Hornet. That's the object that's in there. It's a thermal imaging, which tells you when it'll be white 1 minute and it'll be black the next minute. And it's telling you that they switched from TV mode to infrared mode. And so it'll change that, and you'll see this in a second. It was on, they locked onto it. The Super Hornet locked onto it, and the next thing, it breaks the lock. It moves off at an incredible speed. They're showing you the parts of the screen, the information which we use to study it. Here it is. He's about 20,000 feet altitude, roughly. I think that's where he was. And he's got the lock on it. He's going after it. He changes the zoom ratio. He switches to TV mode. Now it looks black, but it's basically, it was a white Tic Tac. And then you'll see it then change it, a little bit of its shape, and then it shoots off to the left. It breaks the lock. Watch this. There, it's going to shoot off to the left now. Now there it goes. It shoots off. Okay. So when it zoomed away, basically, it broke the targeting lock, which is hard to do, by the way, and the aircraft was going out. And in this instant, it was just one of those incredible cases that I'll tell you more about it. But that's not the only case. Then in 2015, we hear about a case, the USS Roosevelt, which was on also on exercises off the coast of Florida. And it's engaging over about 30 of these like objects, right? And over a period of a month, they were seeing these all along the East Coast, just off of Washington, D.C., all the way down to Florida. And so they had some videos that they were having, and they called the first one Go Fast and the other one Gimbal, but I'll show you these. So this one has, now the first one you had didn't have any sound. You didn't hear the voice of the pilot. This one you'll hear. Again, an F-18 Super Hornet aircraft. And again, they're using what they call the AESA kind of weapon system. All right. Again, they show the screen in terms of what you got on the screen. The sensor's aimed at 35 degrees, aircraft's axis. It was 4.1 nautical miles slant from the target to the aircraft. The sensor is aimed at 22 degrees below the aircraft axis, and the F-18 is in a 5-degree turn. He's in a right turn. The ATFLIR targeting system does an auto track, and then you're going to hear the pilot trying to lock onto this object, and he gets a lock on as the object moves around. So here we go. It's at 25,000 feet altitude. That's the aircraft. And here we go. Now there's an object moving along there. You'll see it zipping by. A little white object. Turn it down. Volume. Yeah, it's pretty loud. But you can hear the excitement, right? He's going like, "Hey, I got him!" And he's there. He goes. He's got him on lock, and he's trying to track him. So that was one of the videos that was taken. In addition to that, you have another one that came up. They call this one the gimbal video. This is taken by a different pilot, different day.
Was this Navy also?
Navy. Go Navy, right? Wait, here these are the fighter pilots again who are observing it. And you'll hear him say something about, hey, we've got 30 of these on the AESA. Okay? So there's like about 30 of these objects that they're all seeing at the same time. This one is an interesting one in the sense that it does the actual object turns on its side like this and is still moving along. And objects will also do that. Sometimes they'll turn and they'll flip, and then they can move sideways. We think it's sideways, but they're moving along. So it's really strange stuff. Okay.
Dude, this is a fucking drama, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Oh, big dude. That's not how that's though, is it? It's not a different on Earth, man. Well, it's seriously interesting. It's rotated.
See it turn over on its side? So there's really strange stuff. All right, so we're having all these encounters. Two other cases that you haven't heard about yet because they haven't been discussed. The USS Boxer in 1998 had a case. It was located where that Nimitz was off the San Diego. So there was another one of these encounters. By the way, the USS Boxer was the ship that was over here with the Strait of Hormuz that had the drone incident you heard about with Iran. That was the Boxer that was over there for that. The USS Bainbridge also had something in 2017 that we're learning about off the East Coast. So the point that I'm trying to get at is that they're out there in the water. They are out there in the water. And I was commenting earlier that we should really call the planet, instead of the planet Earth, we should call it the planet water. 3/4 of the planet is water. It's covered with water. We don't spend a lot of time there. Well, they do. Okay? So they're using the water to their advantage. There's a lot of press that's going around right now. The Washington Post, you see that. UFOs exist. Everyone needs to adjust to that fact. Get over your previous beliefs. They are here. They're real. And the Pentagon is coming out admitting that it has the UFO inquiry. And just recently they came through and they said, well, we're going to start to take reports from all these Navy guys. You know, that we want them to report. So that's going to take a while before they can change the culture there, but they're actually, wanting them to come forward. And that's a change. And we're working with the Air Force, we're working with the other ones to do the same kind of thing. Because that's the only way we're going to find out what the heck these things are and why they're here. And we need serious scientists to be able to do that. We're starting to actually go and mount and look at the fact that the AESA radars are starting to now pick these things up because we're getting better and smarter with our technology. So it's able to discern these objects better. So that's been exciting. So our technology is helping us to look at that will help us to find out more. In the case of the Roosevelt that I was telling you about, USS Roosevelt, when they got deployed, they went over to Iran in that area again, and they were watching these objects over there too. So they follow, it follows them. It's around everywhere. Right? So where are they from? I mean, if we really want to get into it, you can go crazy with this. We don't really know, but there seems to be these ideas that they're ET coming from outer space. And there's nothing wrong with that, because guess what? We actually have scientists who spoke in this thing, this conference that I had here in March, that were talking about propulsion, interstellar travel, and everything else. And they're flat out telling you that we're getting very close, conceptually and theoretically, to be able to do interstellar travel. And if you take a look at that kind of technology, if we can, they're showing how you could potentially, even if you're going at a certain amount of the speed of light, that relativistic travel. Now, what I'm talking about there is that you've heard this paradigm, you all stay on Earth and I go up on a spacecraft and I get near the speed of light, time slows down for me, but it doesn't for you, right? And I come back and you're all no longer here, right? But I've now gone out there and it's been relatively perfectly normal to me, right? So I could theoretically go at near speed of light kind of speeds, and I could be on the other side of the entire universe. And they calculated it out. It'd probably be about maybe like 20 months. And that's what I would experience. But if I came back here, thousands of years have gone and everything else, and it's going to be a little bit of a problem. So we're getting, and we're looking at craft that we can do that. In fact, the Navy just came up with a patent that almost creates something like these Tic Tacs. Did you know that? So we're getting to the point where our scientists and everything else are starting to figure out a little bit more than what we all believe. And they've been doing that. In fact, if you looked at Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Martin, he'll tell you that we've got the stuff to be able to take ET back home right now. Okay? So is it feasible that other people are coming here? Sure. Yeah. In fact, we're proposing the fact that if we go interstellar, we'll go together as a group and become nomads. And then we'll just take off and we'll go over to one area and then we'll split off and go. And within a very short time, we could have gone and been around much of the actual universe in just a short time. Again, the lifetime of the people that are traveling at those speeds and various other things, but we could do that. There's the interdimensional hypothesis. It says that they kind of like pop in from nowhere and pop out. And that's very true. We have cases where we've had cases where we've actually tracked on deep space satellites objects coming in to our airspace. Did you know that? Deep space satellites, our spy satellites, are picking up objects coming in that are now being reported as UFOs. Same time, we've also got the interdimensional kind of thing where they pop in and pop out, and we see cases where out of nowhere, an object suddenly appears, and it's the size of 4 aircraft carriers. And there's a case that I'll tell you about in Japan that was the case. And it disappeared. But yet it was picked up on radar. How do you have an illusion that's picked up on radar? Okay. Then I created this one. It's called the always been here hypothesis, the ABH. They may have always been here, and they may have been here before us. And if you look at historical records from every culture on this planet, they're all talking about the fact that they're coming down from up there. They're the gods, or they're this or that. And so there are drawings and photographs throughout our history of objects that are up in the sky. Then there's the time travel hypothesis. Well, then you have a case over in Bentwaters, England, which an object comes down and it's surrounded by 20 military officers. And one of them goes up and touches it, and he's hit by a blinding flash of light. He then proceeds over a period of time to come back, and he's starting to write ones and zeros. He doesn't even know what that ones and zeros is. Turns out it's binary code. You know what the binary code says? This is a spacecraft from the future that's coming back in time to do surveillance. Okay, so there are cases out there that can match that. Then there's like a hybrid. It could be all those. It could be mixtures of those. We don't know. And the problem we have with ufology tends to be a lot of people jump to the one conclusion when we haven't been able to prove or disprove any one of these hypotheses. There's been over 4,000 cases of physical evidence alone that have been collected. We have everything from scorched and baked earth. I show you a case where I was out there on a case with 70 foot in diameter, and the soil's been baked 2 feet in the ground. How do you do that? We got thermal imaging, we got photographic cases, we got radar visual, we got sonar data, we've got testimonial evidence over the period. We got metal and debris. In fact, you're going to be hearing more about that because now we're finding some metals that basically are passing the test to say that these are not from the planet Earth. We have the integration into our technology, which is also going on, and I'll talk radiation burns to witnesses. We have physical trauma. We have a whole variety of things documented. And there's a lot of this stuff that's been collected. Did you know that the CIA was going to a lot of cases and actually absconding all the data and telling people to shut up and to not talk about it, that this has immediately been classified? Did you know that? They were actually going into cases and collecting all the data and said, you will not talk about this anymore. And then they walk out with the data. Okay? So they got a lot of information. What do we know about it? If you stood at the 95,000-foot ceiling and said, what are these objects doing? What are they about? Whatever makes sense of this? It's hard to do. But the one thing you'll find out that they seem to have the interest in the nuclear kind of things I was telling you about. Because it's not only just about where these sites are, but where Oak Ridge, where we produce that stuff. It's also about where we store it. It's about where we have our nuclear subs. It's about all those kinds of things. So there seems to be an indication there. They seem to be testing our defenses and our capabilities because they like to hang around jets and exercises and various other kinds of things. Okay? They seem to like water because it seemed to be that they're coming in and out of water a lot of times. And then if you looked at these cases that are being reported where people are saying that I'm taken aboard and I've been abducted or something like that, well, what do you get out of that? Well, I don't know. It's almost like if you listen to what they say, it seems like that there's a hybridization program. They're actually taking some of our sperm, eggs, and various other things, mixing it with theirs, and then doing something to create a hybrid baby. I don't know how to account for that, but yet that's what people are saying. And it's not just even in the United States. This is not a United States phenomenon. It's a world phenomenon. So how do you deal with that? They seem to be out collecting things, minerals, even DNA, I guess, maybe you might say. And then there's these things called animal mutilation cases we have. And I investigated a case that I can't yet been able to explain of a baby beefalo that was mutilated and cut 6 inches around the heart area down to the brisket. And the left tip of the ear is there. And then the animal's found out in the middle of a field. And it wasn't even at that. It has no blood in it. And the farmer goes and takes it into the sheriff and says, somebody killed my cow. And he said, well, go see the veterinarian. He goes to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian says, I've never seen cuts like that before in my life. And the fact that it's got no blood in it. Okay? So, and then he buries it, and then 2 weeks later, we go out and we dig it up with a team, and there's nothing left of the animal in the ground. In 2 weeks. No hair, no bones, no anything left of that animal. I can't explain it, but yet that's going on too. I don't know. There's a lot of witnesses. Know any of these people? You ever recognize a few? There's a lot of people that will eventually say something that they've seen something, but a lot of people don't. You know. But we had astronauts seeing them, scientists. We got generals who've seen them. We got all kinds of people who see them. We got politicians who see them. What do we know about the craft? Well, they vary in shape in terms of the report, and a lot of times people are just trying to remember what they saw up in the sky, and they try to do a crude drawing. And a lot of times they're not the best artists in the world, but okay. Do they vary? Is a Russian UFO the same as a Papua New Guinea one? Yeah, for the most part. Are they the same here? Yeah. I mean, for the most part, there's variances. There's tic-tacs now. There are 5 observables that we know about the UAP, that they have anti-gravity figured out, that they seemingly have sudden and instantaneous acceleration, and they can decelerate. You don't go from 80,000 feet to stop at sea level without doing something like that, right? They're going at hypersonic velocities without any kind of electronic signatures. It's like, does it make any sense? We're not being able to pick them up with our various different technology. They have like a cloaking ability. They can either maybe appear out of nowhere, and then they can also go through these different mediums that I'm talking about. So, there's a lot of shapes that people have reported over a period of time, everything from triangles to boomerangs to now we have tic-tacs, right? So there's a lot of different shapes that have been reported, and we've collected that information. In fact, the Air Force did a study on that called Special Report 14. And does shape really matter? Well, not to these objects, because they're able to do what they're doing, and who cares what shape it is. There's no propulsion systems. You have everything from lights in the sky being reported. You have cylinders being reported. You've got cigar-shaped objects. You've got disc-shaped objects. You've got triangles. You've got boomerangs. You've got oval-shaped. And then you got tic-tacs. Okay? So, and the maddening thing for all of us ufologists that go out and study and actually listen to witnesses tell their stories is to try to figure out the maze of like, well, was it a single light? Yeah, okay, was it stationary? And we go through all these different kind of like deductions to say, well, can we explain it naturally? And when we get to the point where we can't explain it naturally, then it's a UFO. You know? But we have to go through and look at everything that's in the sky, and we have to know about everything that's in the sky, or that could be in the sky. I have a drone that I fly. Drones are being reported. I got one guy who came into my house, was doing the security system, and he was telling me, he didn't know he was talking to the head ufologist or like that, and he's telling me about, hey, I got a drone, and I built it to look like a UFO, and I'm flying it down here in Huntsville. Really? Can you let me know when you're flying? You know, that type of thing. So anyway, you know, so I mean, he intentionally built it to look like a UFO and fool people. So we got the challenges of that. We got all of our aircraft that are up there, and our technologies have changed and continue to change. These are dirigibles and blimps. I mean, you think that that could be reported as UFO? Sure, easy. You know, and you put lighting packages on those things that look unusual, and they, yeah, sure enough. And then what about these? You know, you got our weapon systems and the drones that we got in here, and we're flight testing these things, and you know, it's like, and the shapes keep getting wilder and wilder. You know, and so, you know, those are up in the sky and people report those things. In fact, let me tell you right off the bat that generally when I go out and I was the state director for Alabama as well as Mississippi, and I'd look at all the reports that were coming in and I would check them out and try to like logically pinpoint what they could be, and you get to the point where you can explain like about 80 to 90% of them, but then you get down to the last 10, you say, well, maybe it's something classified. I don't know. Maybe it's something that's not. I mean, you don't know. But you get down to it, and you just can't explain some of these things. And people are seeing them like, there's the table, and I'm only that far away from it. It's clearly nothing that I've ever seen before. And many of you in this room have told me about close encounters you've had. And that's what I'm talking about. People are seeing that all the time. Okay? There's a lot of triangle reports that are going on. You know, and these things are popping up and hanging over our military exercises. Are they ours? Could they be? Yes. But these things are interesting in the sense that in the good old days, a flying saucer, when it stopped and it hovered, it would do a wobbling effect. Kind of like what they called it, a falling leaf pattern. Right? This kind of thing. Now, these things are triangulars, and they stop in the air and stay exactly in that spot, and they rotate around, and then they shoot off at several thousands of miles an hour. Perfectly standing still, no issue. No wobble. Landing effects. I told you about the 4,000 cases of traces. From what I've been able to deduce in terms of looking at landing effects that we see, and when I go out and look at a case and the ground is baked, if the object has hung above the ground and it was sufficiently up, and there's like a field around the craft, and this field around the craft has an ionization that's going on as well, and which you'll have like a heating built up, and it seemingly is like that thing is coming down and it'll bake the soil. So sometimes when it gets at a certain height, it will create just a round area. And then as it comes a little bit closer, it actually is going underneath the ground. And now you have a ring-like effect that's going on where the burning is taking place, right? So we see a burn ring, okay? And if it's high enough, you won't see any kind of an effect at all because that field around it is not interacting with the earth, okay? So we see that kind of like thing is going on, and it's dehydrating the soil, and unusual things happen to that soil. It no longer mixes and turns into mud. It's hydrophobic. It basically, the dirt will float on the top of the water. It never mixes with water anymore. Here's a case that was in 1980 of these three people. You have Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and her grandson Colby. And they're in Hoffman, Texas, and that's just a little outside of Houston. And this was in the 1980s, and they're going along, and they happen to see an object that's coming across the sky, and they're looking, and they counted like 25 helicopters that were following this object. The object comes across, it's got belching fire out, and oh, by the way, just to let you know, it also burnt that pavement you see out there. And a couple, very short order, somebody came out, actually dug up all that asphalt and covered it back up so that you wouldn't see the burn mark as a result of that. All right? They had and suffered from radiation burns as a result of being in this close proximity. Betty got out of the car, so did Vicki. Vicki was concerned about Colby in the back, and she came back and got in the car quick to take care of Colby, right? But Betty was out there the longest. That evening, all three of these people were throwing up, vomiting, diarrhea, the whole 9 yards, and then short order, hair was falling out and everything else. And so they went, and this was like, as a result of this case, they attempted to find out, well, who has 23 helicopters? A good number of these were Chinooks, and they were trying to find out, well, who? And they kept going around, and people were trying to help them because, how do they get compensation, or how can they find out what the answers were? What was this thing? We now believe that this was not a UFO from outer space, or it might have been, but we were testing it, and something was going wrong. And the helicopters were there to pick up the pieces and recover it and to get it away. Okay? Delphos, Kansas, there's one of those rings. Ronnie Johnson's out attending to the sheep on the farm, putting them away for the evening. It's about dinner time, and Ronnie and his dog Snowball happen to be out there, and they see an object that came through and came down and hovered above and between these trees. And the next thing you know is the intensity of the light became so bright that he couldn't see anymore, and so he's basically blind. And in addition to that, he was paralyzed. He couldn't move. He wanted to move, and he couldn't move. So there he was, stuck. Eventually, he hears all these things, sounds and various other things, and then suddenly it shoots off and moves away. And amazingly, he can now move. And apparently, the dog suffered some effects as well, and with vision as a result of that. But he goes in, stumbling back in. His parents were making their evening meal, and he tells them about they saw something. They come outside, they see the object moving away. For the next 4 nights, the ground is glowing. The tree that was next to it is glowing. And the sheriff was going out there and checking it out. The mother comes out, and she says, well, what is this stuff? And then she went and rubbed it on her pants leg. Well, she was numb on her leg, numb here for several days as well. That soil's been analyzed, and we can't account for the analysis that we got on that. Again, baking of the soil, still hydrophobic. It will not mix with normal mud. In the snow, when the snow falls, it comes down, and it basically just rolls off to the side. This was a case I investigated, I was telling you about in 1973. 70-foot in diameter area. This farmer on the top right happens to be out. There's UFO activity the night before. And he's coming out the next morning to go out and to do his work on his farm. He happens to be up in the 2-story level of the house. He's looking out and he says, well, what happened to my crop? And he's looking down and he's seeing this wheat crop that there's no wheat. Where did that go, And there's no indications of anything like big moving onto the property or onto the middle of the wheat field. And you go out there, you find this 70-foot in diameter area. In the middle, there's a depression. You see that little area right here? There's a depression there, a higher amount of pressure. 2 feet in the ground, the soil has been baked. There's no roots anymore to the wheat. That's gone. When you move progressively away from it in any direction, you start to see a little bit on the outer perimeter, some sort of roots. and you get further out, you'll start to see, it's starting to come up above the ground, little stems. And then you get out further, you see that kind of like indication of that bending down of that. And then there's puffed wheat around the outer perimeter. Totally puffed wheat from heating. And you stand there in the middle of this thing, and there's microwave radiation that we're detecting. But you're standing in the middle, and I was standing in the middle of that, and I was saying, like, how do you do that? And it was like, for me, I've never had a UFO sighting, but this was my aha moment. We all go through those. We say, like, wow, I can't explain this. This is just no way I can explain it. And yet, here it is. So that was my aha moment. And, you just, what does that? And yet, that's seen around the world, that same kind of phenomenon. There are a lot of classic cases. The 1947 is when we got this thing started. I'm sure you've heard about the Kenneth Arnold case in Chehalis, in the state of Washington. It was not they called it a flying saucer. It was not a flying saucer. It was not round. It was actually that disc shape, or not that kind of like shape like a boomerang, and that's what it was. But anyway, it became flying saucer. And then just a few days after that, you got the Roswell case, where allegedly something crashed and the Air Force confiscated it, and then proceeded to create a cover story to say that it was a weather balloon. And then they retracted that story and said, no, it's a mogul, it was a classified thing. And then they came back and retracted that story and said that it was something, and they went on and retracting stories. So, and amazingly enough, none of the information that was supposed to be at Roswell Army Air Force Base can be found anywhere. All the records from that whole thing. And that's where we took off for the atomic bomb drops. Did you know that? That's where we did the development, and flew those missions. Interesting. Then you have in 1950 this object which was in McMinnville, Oregon, taken by a guy named Paul Trent. We measured that object about 70 foot in diameter, pretty large. And remember the shape here that I'm showing you, because it's got like a little protrusion. In a minute, I'm going to show you another one. This is, again, going back to 1950, right? So let's keep going. You can see a little bit larger object. In a minute, I'm going to show you one that's taken in 1957 out of an RAF fighter plane in France, out of the front windshield, and it looks just like that. We had Operation Bainbridge. This was our first exercise on a large scale that was taken, and we're doing this in 1952 near Denmark and Norway. It involved a lot of people, a lot of ships, a lot of aircraft, and for like a period of like weeks, you've got all kinds of UFO reports that are happening at that thing. Everything from objects that were passing overhead, around the aircraft, they were observing shiny spheres, and then it was just an incredible kind of a thing. So like widespread reports going on. In Lubbock, Texas in 1951, there were these kind of objects that were going across the sky. The Air Force wanted to come up and try to, in fact, Ruppelt, the guy who wrote that book that you're talking about, that I was talking about earlier, said, well, it was due to the fact that the city of Lubbock had just installed new mercury vapor streetlights, and because there's a bird called plover that has a greasy belly, these are the reflection of the birds flying over. The problem was that when we measured the speed, they were 600 miles an hour. So those are mighty fast birds. Mighty fast birds, okay? Anyway, and this was calculated by the professors who knew what they were talking about. They calculated speed. There's that aircraft or that object out of that RAF fighter plane I was telling you about. This is taken by a pilot out of the front of his aircraft in 57. Looks amazingly like that one back in McMinnville, Oregon, right? And then you have in 1957, you got a case where Lieutenant Milton Torres was actually over in England, and he was scrambled to intercept a UFO. And it was the size of an aircraft carrier. And it went from stationary to Mach 10 in just almost simultaneously. And it also made a right-hand turn. So it's like, whoa, okay. Right-hand turns at incredible speeds. And oh, by the way, the object was tracked on radar, and it got a range of 250 miles in 2 seconds. 2 seconds. And upon his return to base, look at that last paragraph. Upon his return to base, Torres was ordered not to mention the incident ever again. He was threatened with loss of flight status, and the person who threatened him was from the NSA. In 1958, you have the International Geophysical Year going on, where an object was seen by everybody aboard the ship as they were doing that. And the object came in from the right and circled over Trinidad Island, and then after it circled, it went back out again, and they got like 5 photographs of this thing. It's like a Saturn-shaped object, if you would. No propulsion systems, no wings, no propellers in 1958, okay? There's the case I was talking about that got me started in 64 with Lonnie Zamora. That's Lonnie Zamora on the left, the officer. That's a Blue Book officer on the left with him. And that's what he saw out in the desert. Rex Heflin, and I'm showing you the cases, some of the better cases that have withstood investigations. This is Rex Heflin case in Santa Ana, California in 65. He took an object. It was actually disturbing the ground down below it. Vietnam cases, by the way, guys. I mean, and again, gals. We had Vietnam cases going on, and I've talked with a whole bunch of people about these things. You had GIs that were watching a movie when the sky lit up, and they thought that it was a flare above the ridge. It dropped right down on the light of it, stopped dead about 300 feet to 500 feet up, and it lit up everything. Then it went straight up and completely out of sight in 2 or 3 seconds. Ready for this? All generators on the base, the 2 planes on the runway stopped, and there wasn't a single car, truck, or plane that ran for about 4 minutes. Remember I told you that these EM effects from these things can knock out the power? They did it on ships, they did it on it, they did it on cars, they did it on everything. Right? So there's that kind of phenomenon. And this was going on in Vietnam, 66. And then right around that same time, in 67, then you had these nuclear cases that were going on. And this one here. The UFOs were being seen by the above-ground crew of the missile silo. And they were saying, hey, we got this object that's it's flying around and it's darting around. We don't know what it's hovering above the launch site. Right? It's hovering above the launch site. And they're calling down to the guys down at the bottom of that thing and saying, hey, we're catching this. This guy here, Robert Salas, was one of the guys in the underground command center, right? And he said early, and so he's hearing about what's going on up there. You guys are all going crazy, or there's something going on. The objects would streak across the sky, come in and change direction. They would return to that position overhead. And then the next thing you know is that 6 to 8 of the 10 missiles go completely offline. 16 of missiles were in a go or no-go situation where the configuration. And they couldn't identify, nobody could identify what triggers caused that to happen. Now, the thing about these silos, they were not even, the missiles and everything, they're not connected to each other. It's not like when you take this one down and the network's going to go over and it's going to do that. That's not the case. They're all independent. And they were all down. And this happened several times. Not just in there, in Loring and a whole bunch of our other storage facilities. And we're getting this from, read those FOIA documents. More Vietnam reports. 1968, you had a whole crew up near the DMZ that was having, huh?
That's a swift boat.
Yeah.
I knew you were nuts. John Kerry was driving that one.
John Kerry was right. Anyway, they reported two glowing objects that were following them. You had a whole bunch, and I mean, so you had a lot of that. In fact, the General George Brown was talking. He said, you'd have an aircraft flying along, doing around 500 knots, and a UFO comes alongside, does some barrel rolls around the aircraft, then flies off at 3 times the speed of one of the fastest jets we have in the Air Force. So obviously it has technology far in advance of us. And then later, when he became the chief of staff, he was saying pretty much the same thing. He said, you know, they were seen around the DMZ in the early summer of '68, and this resulted in quite a big battle. So we had those going on. We had the Iranian case that happened in 1976. Now this one is one of the ones that DIA said it's the most compelling case that they have ever seen that supports it. Here you have a situation where, remember I mentioned the deep space satellite sees an object coming in from space? They actually tracked it going to Tehran. It gets to Tehran. Now we're tracking it and following it for an hour with the deep space satellite as it does some incredible things on the ground. Now the Iranians set up the Air Force and they have it go after those objects that were out there that were being seen by their public. They start going out there and they start doing all kinds of maneuvers. But as they got close to the object, suddenly their comms go down. Their navigation systems go down. So they turn around. They come back online. They go back again. And now one of them decides he's going to fire his missiles. The missiles go dead. Right? So now you can't even fire. I mean, this is all going on with these two F4. Also, a commercial plane, it's having problems with its system as it's going by this object. The object then goes and it does all kinds of rotations. It breaks apart into several pieces. Next thing, one of them goes and drops down to the ground, and another one then comes and it goes to the ground. It's seen by people on the ground. It's being looked at by 3 radars. All 3 radars are tracking it. It was blinding light, and the vision was impacted by them. And this whole encounter was going on, and the object then eventually goes over the control tower by the base, right? And the control tower goes out. Okay, so this whole report's put together. It's sent over by wires. DIA and all these other people get it. It goes up the military chain, and they're saying, oh my God, it ends up and senators are looking at it. And they're saying, what is going on? And so this became a major report, and pretty incredible. You have then, remember I mentioned in England you had the Bentwaters case. We have, this was classified, but we had nukes over there in Bentwaters, England. And the object came across and was basically shining a light down into where the nukes were. Some sort of a light that would go actually penetrate through the walls of that and look around. This is the one where I told you the guy touched it and he had the binary code. This is where 20 officers are standing around a craft that is this triangular shape, just hovering above the ground with strange symbols on it. Don't know what it was. I'm sorry?
There's no pictures of it?
No, they didn't have, they did take a camera. You know what happened to the camera? Everything was blurred and smudged and the camera didn't work. And a lot of their other comm gear and stuff that they had with them when they went out there didn't work. So this is one of the problems we have with the phenomena is that, you try to go capture it. If you get close to it, then you have these EM effects. People's phones will go dead and that type of thing. So it's a problem. They did have the landing, and they did do plaster casts, and they also did radiation. They found radiation out there. Okay? Then you have, in 1986, this case, and this is a situation where you have the Japanese airline flight number 1628 is up in Alaska, and it's coming down. It's got a cargo flight, and as it comes down, the next thing you know is that the crew there begins to see that hey, we've got traffic up in front of us. We see these 2 lights that are coming toward us. We don't know what they are. We think that they might be aircraft. But anyway, these things are coming up to us. And so, do you have anything? And the control tower says, no, we're not seeing anything. And then they start asking around. Another aircraft said, well, we see a light out there. And eventually what happens is that out of nowhere, this object comes from behind. And basically, you can see this is the aircraft size. That's the size of the object. Okay? So you see, he's describing how large that thing is. And it's like, and oh, by the way, it's being tracked by military radar as well as the FAA. Okay? And this is the one case where I'm telling you that when they were sitting down having a meeting and they were meeting with the CIA said that this is immediately classified and took all of the radar and everything else that they had at the meeting with the FAA. Okay? You won't talk about it anymore, right? Except for the fact that John Callahan, who happened to have copies of the radar data in his desk, and who is willing to come forward and to talk about that happening. And now you look at the radar data and you find out the speed was pretty doggone incredibly fast even for this. Okay? Here's a little clip.
Involved a flight captain with 30 years experience interpreting the sky.
One of the most famous
I'll show you a little bit of this.
cases anywhere in the world took place in Alaska.
It begins as a routine cargo flight on November 17, 1986. A Japanese plane loaded with wine leaves Paris on the long haul back to Tokyo. But over Alaska, JAL Flight 1628 becomes anything but routine.
This is the first time they've ever had radar data for more than a few seconds.
This is John Callahan that I was telling you about.
John Callahan was the FAA division head in charge of evaluations and investigations at the time of the JAL flight.
You have an airplane or a structure or a craft that's sitting outside that 747's window, and it never entered my mind that it might really be a UFO until I saw the radar.
Just after 6 p.m., Captain Kenji Terauchi and a crew of 2 enter Alaska airspace for the second leg of their journey, heading for Anchorage. At the helm, Captain Terauchi has nearly 30 years in the cockpit. At 6:19 p.m., the crew sees something on the radar. Unable to see another plane outside the window, they ask the control tower to identify it.
Anchorage Center, Japan Air 1628. Do you have any traffic above?
Moments later, the crew sees a pair of lights on the horizon.
Inside, we have 2 traffic in front of us, about a mile ahead.
Anchorage Air Traffic Control still sees nothing.
Over the next 30 minutes of that flight, a variety of incidents and things occurred that made this flight the mystery flight of UFOs.
Coming up,
We're not sure, but we have the traffic inside now.
It's a huge ship out here. It's no longer an airplane. It's a huge thing out here that's 4 times as big as an aircraft carrier.
It comes back on here a second, or it did.
November 1986. As JAL 1628 approaches Anchorage, the crew reports seeing strange lights. Over the next 40 minutes, one of the most famous UFO stories in the world unfolds over the skies of Alaska. The JAL transmission catches Anchorage Air Traffic Control off guard.
We're not sure, but we have the traffic inside now.
And when the controller hears these words, it's like death approaching him, because it means that somehow he screwed up. There's something's wrong somewhere.
Anchorage Air Traffic Control now asks Flight 1628 to maintain visual contact with the unknown craft.
it's a huge ship out here. It's no longer an airplane. It's some kind of a huge thing out here that's 4 times as big as an aircraft carrier.
19 minutes after first encountering the unidentified craft, the crew nervously requests a new altitude and change to their flight plan. The goal, shake the unknown craft. Air traffic control requests that the Japanese airliner make a full circle.
Commander 1620 Heavy, I'm going to request you making a right turn 360 degrees, sir.
I'm going to move on because we have, in the interest of time, I want to be able to answer questions. But you get the flavor of that, right? The fact that this thing was just absolutely a huge aircraft, and it stymied a lot of people because they said they just couldn't account for it. You know, what was it? The radars were picking it up and seeing it, and then even aircraft behind them that they had were trying to see it, and they couldn't identify it either. And then it just disappeared. Just vanished right in front of them. Where did it go? How do you take something that's 4 times the size of an aircraft carrier and then just suddenly make it appear out of nowhere and disappear out of nowhere? I mean, into nowhere. So that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. Let me show you an incredible thing that you have not seen yet or heard about. This is a case that SCU got started with after we heard about it in 2013. What I'm going to show you here is an object which was taken by Homeland Security. And let me tell you a little bit of the story here. The date is April 25th in 2013. This is out of like Aguadilla, Puerto Rico. And Aguadilla, Puerto Rico is located over in the very far western side, up in the northern side of Puerto Rico. There's an Air Force base that used to be up there called Ramey Air Force Base. And we had a lot of SAC bombers that were up there at one point, and then we were flying even other more advanced aircraft out of it. The base is still there, but they turned it over to civilians to be able to use. So now it's the Rafael Hernandez International Airport. And what you have is a situation where on this particular evening, a crew of Homeland Security was on their routine mission, and they were taken off of that at that airport. And they were kind of like heading east off of that, and then they were going to do a circle around to go and conduct their mission. And what you have to understand is they're looking for like drug smugglers and that type of thing. That's what Homeland Security is doing, and they have these routine missions. And at the bottom of the aircraft, this is a -8, the bottom of it, they have a radar, which is basically looking downward at the water. It doesn't do well looking out. And then on the front part of the aircraft, you'll have like an extension where they have in this case, it was a Westcam camera, thermal imaging camera. And they have a crew of 4 in the plane. You have the pilot, the co-pilot, and then you have the radar operator in the back seat, and then you have the camera operator over there. And so what happens is they go up, and they were given clearance to take off. It's 9 o'clock at night, it's dark outside. As soon as they get up in the air, they're looking over, and there's a light coming toward the Air Force base, or the airport. And they call the control tower and said, I thought you said I was cleared. You know, there's an aircraft, there's some sort of an aircraft up here. We don't know what it is. And we see the light, and it has like a pinkish light to it. So we don't know really what it is, and it's not like a strobe or anything like that, you know, nothing like a typical aircraft. And so they say, well, we're going to check it out. And so they go doing a big circle around this thing and go out pretty far. But as they continue watching it, coming in, and it's heading, and now the control tower is saying, well, we see it too, visually. We're seeing whatever this thing is too. And then as they're going and doing a circle around, as they're investigating this thing, they do the loop around. They get almost to the point where that they took off from the runway in terms of that huge circle that they had made. And now they're looking and the light goes out. Now their curiosity is up. The light went out. Is this likely drug smugglers that are now doing the mission and they cut their lights out and they're going to drop drugs or something like that? So now they're curious. So here's what happens. They basically do that loop around again. He yells back to the guy that's got the thermal imaging camera and says, turn on the camera. And for the next 3 minutes and 54 seconds, you've got a video clip of an object in thermal. And let me tell you what thermal is. It's going to look like, when I show you this video, it's going to look like it's daylight, but it's not, it's night. And thermal records heat. So when we see on this thermal imaging thing, the object or anything out there that looks like it's it's white or black, that means it's the temperature, and they can set it to either being black hot and white's cold, or white's hot and black is cold. You get what I'm saying, right? There's a thermal difference between those things. So in this case, when we watch this video, you're going to see that the image is that black is hot when we watch it, okay? So they turn on that, and they basically, eventually, the pilot leaked it out when they got back to base, because they were trying to figure out who they could send this thing to. Who would take it seriously? And so they sent it up through the Homeland Security chain, and they said, well, we don't do anything with this. They sent it over to Air Force Intelligence, and they said, well, we're not doing anything with this stuff anymore either, right, hypothetically, right? So they came back, and they said, well, okay, if nobody cares about it, I'm going to release it. So they said, well, can we find any serious ufologists? We don't know who to, So they ran into one of us and said, can you look at this, So we spent 2 years analyzing this 3-minute and 54-second clip that I'm going to show you. We broke each into individual frames. There were 7,027 frames. And then we broke it down and looked at every little, what they call pixel, on those things to determine its exact position, its speed, the size of it, everything that we could, right? And that's what's in this report that I've got up here I told you about. That's 167 pages. We put all of our analysis and all of our science into it. We can tell you the temperature of the object. We can tell you all different kinds. But what you're going to see is this object's moving in around the airport, and it makes a big loop. It gets to a lower altitude to the point where it's actually now skimming across nearly the ground and treetops. And you're going to see it then go back into the water, and then you're going to see it go underneath the water, and you're going to actually see it moving along underneath the water, because what it's doing is it's creating what they call a Bernoulli hump. And what that is, and we're doing this with detecting subs and various other things underwater with our kind of like wonderful cameras, that you get like as a water moves over, it displaces the water and it creates a hump in the ocean, right? Little bump. And you can detect that bump, and you can actually look at that, and you can tell that a sub is moving or something like underneath the water, right? So we're doing that with the same thing, with the object. The object comes back up, it gets intensely hot and gets really, really dark, and it splits into 2 identical objects that are both moving along in the water. This is what you're going to see. Ready for this? So, there's the airport, the craft route that's going to take. You're going to see a screen like you saw on those other things that I showed you, where there's a whole bunch of metadata that tells us everything about the date and time that it is, the ground tracking, the infrared mode, the zoom, the distance. And we use all this in our scientific analysis that we did to be able to get as much in terms of the exact location, the GPS location of the aircraft, where that's pointing. And you're going to see this little dot, and eventually they zoom in on it and they can make adjustments. But you're going to watch this. You ready for this? Here we go. Okay, there's the object. He's got it near the crosshairs in the middle. It's dark. It's coming in. You can see the water out there from the Puerto Rico off the coast of that. It's going to progressively make a little movement here. You'll see a little dot moving across there. And then there's an aircraft that's on the runway. That was a FedEx plane. Now he zooms in. And in the top right, you see it now moving in, right? So here it is. It's moving along. It's moving at about 85 miles an hour right here. It's also going against the wind. It's also got no propulsion system to it, nothing at all that's controlling it. It is about the temperature of 104 degrees, roughly, in its temperature, which stayed pretty much consistent. It goes around the airport. They'd stopped the FedEx plane from taking off because of this thing. It then comes around the base. You'll see it go along, and it proceeds to then come by a supermarket. It goes behind, and this is where you'll see it, the runway. You'll then see it come across the runway, and in a short minute here, you'll start to see this supermarket that I was telling you about. And it's just about coming up there. Okay, now it's getting down to the point where it's down at the treetop levels, and it went behind a telephone pole there where we were able to, it's starting to go behind the trees. It's moving through the trees. It's now made like this incredible loop. It's getting lower in terms of its altitude. You're starting to start to see it go out to where it's going to go now into the water area where it first came, almost where it first came in at, believe it or not. You'll see waves on the top left there. You see the waves coming in? Okay, now it's down to almost the water level, and you start to see it moving across there. He zooms in on it. Now you got to increase zoom. No normal shape, signature of any kind. You start to see it go into the water. You start to see the white part of the water. It pops up occasionally, coming back up, a little dodging. It eventually gets down to the point where it gets really, really deep and then comes back up, and we'll see the guy zoom out. He zooms out. There's the object moving again across the water. It's near the reticle area. And then it's going to get really, really dark. See how it get really dark? Now watch. It splits into two objects. And they're both moving along at about roughly, it was about 85 miles under the water, and it came back and slowed to about 40 miles an hour, and then it started slowing down. And then the one object that split off from it goes into the water, and now this one is hanging up for a little bit, and then it goes in the water. And now the pilot's saying, well, where did it go? Can we keep trying? And you'll see him move around, and he's trying to figure out where it's at. He zooms in, zooms out. He says, did we lose it? I think we lost it. And there you go. Now they've said, well, it's gone. The FedEx plane gets to go take off and do its normal mission. And it was allowed to carry on. And then these guys went on and did their regular mission with Homeland Security. Okay? Pretty interesting, huh? You ever seen anything split into two like that? But guess what? These objects, just like I told you in Tehran, were doing that. They split into two and they merge back into one. They'll do all these kinds of things. We see them change shape in the sky. So there you go, the Aguadilla case. Any questions? Did I blow your mind? Yeah. Through every major war, there's been something. And I'm talking about not just our wars. I'm talking about like, Waterloo. There might have been, I'm talking about like, throughout history. And we have right now teams of people who are fluent in other languages that are going and through old documents and records that can read it and collecting the cases. And we're putting those things and documenting them. So yeah, there are cases throughout that time. In the 1800s, there were mysterious airships that were being seen across the skies. And they didn't know what they were. And at that time, we didn't have airships. But these things were being seen up in the air, and they called them airships. They go through everybody calls it, like the Romans called them fiery shields. They used their vernacular of the day and what they knew or could understand. So even you have to understand that some of the reports that are out there that other countries have, they didn't know about meteors either, right? So you have to look at those and say, well, it could have been a meteor, But they didn't know about them at the time. We didn't know about meteors and rocks coming out of the sky. Whoever heard of that? You know, it's like for a long time. So anyway, good question though. Yeah, hand.
Are you any closer to figuring out what they might be today than 50 years ago?
Yeah, we're starting to get a more of an understanding of how the craft could work, more of an understanding of their like overall mission, if you would, that we couldn't figure out. You know, we don't declare that we can understand an alien intelligence. I wouldn't make that claim. But what we do is we know that there are certain kinds of patterns that we see, and some of the patterns we can kind of predict. And we know that there are these places called hotspots around where there's a lot more activity. And so now what we're doing is ufologists, is we're getting scientists to come on board with deployable platforms of kinds of cameras and various other things that we can position in the hotspots so we can actually start to record more. And the other thing that we have to understand is, you and I are looking at, we're only seeing a small part of the entire spectrum, the visible range, right? So as we keep getting tools like infrared cameras, or we get these other kinds of cameras that we can use, we can start to see a broader part of the entire spectrum. And so now we're starting to say, well, wait a minute, what does that object look like in the thermal? We just got to see what they look like. Now let's look at them in other kinds of parts of the ranges so we can learn more. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that we're starting to see that those kinds of things happen. And we're getting clearer about the fact that now with a government that's willing to say that they exist, well, maybe that's going to help us to get and use these tools that we're spending all of our money on to build these defense weapons and systems and stuff that could actually help us to do something and study. There's only one case that's on military record, where the Kinross case, where an instance where, this is pretty wild, where an object was seen coming across. We had an aircraft going after it to chase it, and they merged on radar, and we never found the plane. It was never found, and the object just shot off. And that's on record. And we have that radar. So what I'm trying to tell you, and then also if you look at the Los Angeles case, where in the 1940s, they made a movie of it. It was that John, the funny guy, Belushi, but that incident. And it was a situation where we had 325 guns firing at an object that we thought was the Japanese coming in from doing an invasion, right? And it was a disc-shaped object, and they had spotlights on it and everything else. The bullets would bounce off. They wouldn't hit the object. And then we have, if you look at the book that that you have right there, there's a case where we're trying to shoot at it, and the bullets are not effective. So there's that kind of thing. But we haven't had one where it saw something, or it wasn't maybe, and then they flew kind of through it. There's nothing on record like that. Yeah, and that's let me also be very clear with you. There's so much bogus information out there that it's hard to get through the bogus information for the real good stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, there's such a plethora of fake stuff that's out there. We have people that are creating sites that are just creating bogus stuff and sticking it out there. And so our job has been challenged, weeding through that to actually get to the real case. And then we spend all of our time on the better cases. That's what we're doing. But I wouldn't be surprised at something like that. So if you take a look at the research right now on what they call polarizable vacuums by a guy named Dr. Hal Puthoff, who happened to be here in March, by the way, you find out that we're actually, you can have this is a little bit technical, okay? But you can have a craft that has what they call a resonant cavity, and you can have microwave emitters coming out of it. And that can basically create what they call a polarizable vacuum around the craft, which reduces the inertia and the mass to nothing. So in that context, we're able to take and negate inertia and create craft that can fly like the Tic Tac. So I guess I'm trying to say is, this is how far we've come in terms of our science to have these theoretical concepts that we're now starting to test and apply to be able to do that. If you look at the Russians and what they're doing with they're trying to hypersonic weapons and all that other stuff like that. And we keep looking at that same too. The idea is to be able to you can make a movement through water, air, and all that stuff like that seamless, you know? And so we took subs and we tried to create, the kind of like the bubbles, if you would, around the craft so it would move and slipstream through the water. And you keep having all these kinds of things going on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yeah, we're getting pretty darn smart is what I'm trying to get at. And we're figuring things out. And so it leads us into being able to do more of what you now start to see the UFOs have been doing all along. Anybody who tells you that we have so there are these people that are coming out and making these secret space program announcements on the backside of the moon, and I was a soldier and I went up and I went to Mars and oh, by the way, I saw President Obama when he was younger and all this other stuff. And I saw these blue avians and all that other stuff like that. That's all hogwash. All total hogwash. Now, coming back to the space program. Does the United States have a need for a space program? Let me put it this way. Yeah, from a defensive standpoint, if we're starting to see other countries that are wanting to send up all kinds of like deployable things up into space, you know that that's the next domain, right? Okay, so you want to be able to deflect and manage that and reduce that threat that we would have. You all know that if all it takes is just for somebody to put up the right kind of platform to knock out all of our power grid, right? You could have an EMP pulse that could go along and knock a lot of that out. So the big concerns in terms of where we are, how we're positioned for those types of things like EMP pulses and various other kinds of things, we need to know as a nation and how to deflect that. Yeah, well, that's where they're trying to test putting out these hypersonic kinds of vehicles, and I think that they were starting to use nuclear fusion types of things. We had the scientists we had here when we were talking about propulsion systems. There's so many different kinds of propulsion systems that we're looking into that are amazing. It's amazing to me. I mean, we're actually getting into using ion propulsion systems. We're using a whole variety of different kinds of things, and now the idea is that I have a craft and I actually warp space in front of it so that I slipstream through because I'm now warping space and I actually don't need any fuel of any kind. I'm basically now can fly at near speed, incredible speeds, and just slipstream through space. We're starting to understand the fabric of space as well, and I guess how we can do those kinds of things. And so that being said, I was working on a project that those deployable cameras in which I was working with Stephen Hawking while he was alive. And he was willing to fund and help to get us the platform. And I was also working with the cinematographer Doug Trumbull, who was the cinematographer for Close Encounters of the Third Kind and made all those incredible space movies like, in 2001 A Space Odyssey. He was a special effects guy. And he's into UFOs very heavily. And so him and Hawking and us, and we were all trying to be able to put together these platforms. And then, of course, he died, but we're even closer in doing that. Yeah. Let me put it to you this way. It's going on around us for a long time, but what has it done against us?
Well,
okay, so
all those incidents that you talked
yeah.
about, the people, the planes and everything.
Yeah.
What about children?
Yeah. What about?
Well, do they ever come down far enough that children could see them? And
A whole school in Africa witnessed an object that was like that came down and actually talked to the being who was outside of the craft looking directly at them. This has actually been captured on YouTube, and they're making it into a movie. It's called the Arial phenomena. And this whole school all came back and drew an alien being that they had seen. And the I'm sorry?
You need to have that in your presentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry.
I actually had the producer of the film here in March.
Bring him
Yeah. You'll have to come back for my conference next year. So Roswell was obviously a very interesting effect, a crash that happened. And what happened there was that the object apparently, we believe that we had the gain turned up on our radar systems at that time. That was early radar. It was out of that area. And somehow radar might have had or come into play with these craft, because there's a whole bunch of these things that were crashing in that one part of the country. And like Kingman, Arizona, and you had the Roswell crash, and you had other crashes. In fact, there's over 200 reported crashes. And so that being said, when that happened, a section of the craft broke apart and fell off. And that was a debris field that one of the farmer found. Okay? And then the other bigger section of it went over the hill into a different area. And allegedly what happened was that the initial debris field that Bill Brazel and them found, they picked up the material and they collected it and they take it into town and all that wonderful stuff. The bottom line was that the people talked about it, and they talked about these different kinds of metals. One would talk about a lightweight metal that you could crush it in your hand, and then when you opened up your hand, it would expand back out to a normal shape, right? Another piece of metal was lightweight, but you couldn't bend it, you couldn't burn it, you couldn't do anything to get it to budge. And here it was a lightweight material. Two different types of metal. So let's follow the metal trail, okay? Did you happen to know that the debris was, and all that, the wreckage was allegedly taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? That was the Army airfield, or it wasn't even the Air Force Base at the time. And I'm talking to people now that are on the receiving end because I was in Dayton, right? So they said that they got it. And I was talking to people there. So the other aspect of that was that who did the Air Force work with as a consultant? They worked with Battelle. They had a relationship to study UFOs with Battelle. Battelle starts to now take the debris and pass it out to different players to have them re-engineer it, right? Figure it out. They came up, the Navy got some of it. You ever heard of nitinol? Nickel titanium alloy. NOL, Naval Ordnance Lab. They were able to take the metal, they were able to figure out how to re-engineer it, and now we suddenly have Battelle coming up and developing shape memory alloys that can do the same thing. People are wearing your little glasses, you can bend it, and you can now have it come back into normal shape, right? That's made out of that nickel titanium alloy. So we start to get it over in the commercial world. So the material from Roswell now ends up being used by us for our everyday purposes. Okay? So it's a legitimate case of something that crashed in that area. And the question about the recovered bodies and everything else, that's also very legitimate, because you have all these people, there's over 600 first-hand, second-hand, third, and for 10 years after the Roswell case happened, if I were on the phone with you and I said, hey, and I'm a resident in the area, and I said that I hid a little box of that metal over here, you would get a knock at the door by somebody claiming to say, we heard you talking about that, please hand it over. They were being monitored for their conversations and various other things for that length of time. So, and I've talked with people who were on they were tasked, they were soldiers that were tasked to go out in the field and collect all the debris. So something happened, and it was not from here. Well, I mean, again, going back to they tend to be here observing us. What do we do when we go? What are we doing? We're sending up robots to Mars and other planets, right? We send up robots to go find if there's life on that other planet, right? So you find out that there's life on the other planet, and you want to study it, right? You want to continue maybe additional missions. You also don't want to go and impact it, right? You don't want to affect it. You want to just observe it. If we go on an interstellar mission, we're going to go popping off to look for life elsewhere. We don't want to interrupt it, and we want to just observe it. That's what they're doing. They're observing us, and they're popping in and out of water, and they come up and they watch what we're doing. And oh, by the way, what are we doing? If they're underwater in the ocean, right, and they're doing, that's where they live, if you would, on their base, if you would, that they have here. What were we doing around 1945, 1946? We were blowing up in the atolls using nuclear weapons, right? Isn't it interesting that they start to pop up and get a little bit concerned about that, and then they want to go off and shut off our nukes and everything else, right? So I'm trying to send you a message. Are you getting it yet? That there's not. So we start to see that that's more likely the case, right? They're not out here to try to harm us. They are trying to observe us. And apparently they could be reporting back to some other place that these fools down here on the planet are still blowing themselves up, and they're still at war, and they're still doing all this, and they're not intelligent species yet. So, I mean, let me tell you, in that Nimitz case that I told you about, so you're ready for this. This is pretty interesting. This shows you that there are intelligence on our military. Okay? When we sent up the jet that were going after them, and one of the jets started going and chasing this object, and it did a spiral up, and then it got up there. First off, it noticed that we were coming after it, and so it started to do an evasive action, and then came up from a sea level, and then shot up and came up to 20,000 feet. And then it waited for us. The pilot gets up there, and he cuts across, and he said, well, wait a minute, no, I'm going to show you I'm still superior. It shoots immediately at 24,000 miles an hour, over to what they call the cap point. It's a secret location where you have your combat air patrol go to protect the ships. It's classified. Guess what? It went right to the cap point and waited for him. The object shot, and you hear on the radar, they're saying, you're not going to believe this, but the object is now at your cap point. Okay, well, how did it know that that was the place to go? So if you have an intelligent species that has been around here for a long time, they know our languages. They figured that out. They figured out what we do. And they know even our intelligence on our aircraft and everything else. And so now they know where the cap point is. So that's the kind of thing that we're dealing with. And now you see why the military is now saying, well, we have a threat here, and we've got to really focus on what that threat is because we don't understand it. And oh, by the way, we can't even capture it. We can't even get up near it. It's outmaneuvering everything that we've got, right? So what do you do? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was great.
You're welcome.
Well,